So let me count the different ways in which you can see climate change and experience climate change. And I will say that I feel like beekeepers, for better or worse, are uniquely positioned to appreciate the enormous effects that climate change is already having on the environment. Because I've mentioned many other problems that are affecting the natural landscape that bees operate in, but none of them is any more important than what's happened to the landscape around here that's been caused by increasing numbers of days in the summertime with temperatures over 100 degrees, some incredible drought years. 2011 comes to mind. There's still a lot of standing dead timber in forests in this part of the world that dates back as far back as 2011. And even the trees that weren't killed outright in 2011 succumbed to subsequent heat waves and droughts in the past few years. And I think that is having a huge impact. The ability of bees to cool their colonies is being affected. Water resources are not as widely available, except when it's flooding. And there's been more flooding going on too. So it's not just heat and drought, but precipitation events, rainfall events. There have been multiple rainfall events in the time since I returned here to beekeeping in this part of the world that exceeded anything that ever happened previously, except for like the Galveston hurricane of 1900, the Great Storm, Isaac Storm, the hurricane of 1915, created floods like we've experienced, 10 times in the last 30 years? So all of that is colliding with beekeeping and beekeepers' ability to survive, really, because honey crops are affected. The average productivity of colonies in this part of the world has been cut in half or more, and much of that I attribute to climate change and herbicide applications and landscape change. So, and those things all interact as well. There's reason to believe that those toxic compounds that are present in the environment can do even more harm when they are interacting with excessive temperatures. And when I say excessive temperatures, it's not always heat. One of the things that was so reproducible, predictable, when I was a young guy, learning from my father and grandfather, was the seasonality of beekeeping and when you could expect that you could start rearing queens, because the colonies would have built up large populations. There would be drones present to mate with queens. The pollen and nectar resources would be available to propel colonies forward and to allow exponential population growth. And I'll say that another feature there was that, we knew when to expect honey plants to start blooming so that you could prepare for that. And we would know about how long those bloom periods would last. And we would know roughly how much honey would be produced so that we could appropriately add extra room to our colonies for the bees to store the honey that you'd anticipate. All of that has changed. And now our ability to produce queens as early as we once did has diminished remarkably. And part of that is driven by cooling events that have happened where we get late freezes that historically were quite rare, have now become quite common. And because bees need to thermoregulate their colony in order to sustain the development of their offspring, they have to keep the brood nest at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. And if the colony is big and strong and thinks it's ready to start exploding and the honey flow is about to happen, and then temperatures plunge into the teens or single digits for a week at a time, their ability to keep the colony going is badly affected, because the amount of honey that it takes to keep the colony warm at 91 degrees Fahrenheit when temperatures outside are down in the teens and single digits and the wind's blowing 20 miles an hour is astonishing. And many colonies just are not able to do it. They'll run out of resources because the way they generate heat is to shiver. And the energy that they're using to shiver is coming from the honey that they're consuming. So if they can't keep the colony warm, then suddenly they're losing a whole demographic cohort of replacement worker bees that are there to supplant and replace the workers that are due to die off at about the time they were set to emerge. And so colony population dynamics are completely different and unpredictable. I think that that's at least illustrative of how climate change is having a negative impact on beekeeping.